So this week's Torah portion is a double portion. Parashat Tazria-Metzora. It deals with a lot of body stuff, some gross stuff. I have had at least twice, I have had bat mitzvah students for this parsha, and they're like, at an age where like talking about rituals around menstruation are like super awkward for them. So it's always interesting, but that is certainly a part of this parsha. First, we learn about, so this is the basis for Nida, which is like a whole volume of Jewish law on family purity, which mostly means female purity, but they call it family purity, family law. So the beginning of this parsha talks about one issue of that body of halacha, which is birth, and then the bottom of the parsha, the end of the parsha, talks about menstruation and male emissions, which gets kind of dismissed in later halacha, but at least in the Torah, it's pretty gender equal on that stuff. And then in between, mostly we learn about Za'arat, which is some kind of skin disease. It's often translated as leprosy, but scholars say like that doesn't really check out. Like it's definitely not leprosy. It seems to be possibly like a range of infections of some kind, because they look at what type of, like what color the rash is, and if it gets on the clothes and things like that. So it seems to me that it's not necessarily just one thing, but who knows. So when a person gets Sara'at, they have to be quarantined to stop the spread. And then when they, have done their time, so to speak, in 2 weeks, just like what we thought was going to be our quarantine, they can re-enter the camp, the Israelite groupings, community, but they have to go through still a whole nother ritual, which like really marks them. Like you can't just quietly go into quarantine, wait for your rash to disappear, and then re-enter society. They like make a whole show of like this person was unclean, and they have to shave their head and burn their clothes, and then of course do a sacrifice. That part makes more sense because everything required a sacrifice for purification. But there's a lot of like really physical and more or less public pieces of it as well that, I don't know, can be kind of troubling. The rabbis say, the most common explanation for all this is that Sa'arat is a punishment for Lashon Hara, for gossip or inappropriate speech, which comes from a later parsha in which Miriam and Aaron both speak Lashon Hara, and then Miriam gets Sara'at. So the connection is made there, but it's not clear in this parsha that that Sara'at is always a divine punishment or a source of Lashon Hara. But if we are to assume that, then some of the other stuff makes sense, because like if you speak out inappropriately, you have to make amends, and like it should be public that that you spoke incorrectly, so that people know whatever rumor you started is a rumor, or whatever. Like it has to be sort of course corrected. There's a Bim Bum video. It doesn't have a catchy song, so I'm not going to play it for you like I did last week. But it is a nice explanation about, how if like someone who is prone to Lashon Hara needs to be quarantined, not only to stop the spread of their rash, of the tzara'at, but also to stop the spread of the rumor, and to just kind of like give them a timeout to like think about their words and, reflect and then come back and make amends. So, that's a nice explanation. It certainly makes me a lot more comfortable with the rituals that follow, but it's midrash. So we can also just speculate wildly, as I love to do, about what else is going on in the parsha. So so that's a summary and a little bit of background. Is there any place else that anybody wants to start on, a verse that caught your eye or a question or anything?
There's a part, and I'm going to find it. And while I'm finding it, somebody else could, feel free to say what they'd like to say. But there's a part that talks about what you do when somebody's got an infection, and it talks about the birds and water, and it sounds to me like they're making chicken soup.
Okay, let's look at that. So that's sort of toward the end, right? When they come back in. Let's see. Examined. Shaved his head. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, wait, no, that's the lamb. Okay, here we go. 14:52. He shall slaughter one bird over fresh water. No, sorry, 50. The lineup of the verses of the numbers was weird. Okay, so he shall slaughter one bird over fresh water in an earthen vessel. He shall take the cedar wood, the hyssop, the crimson stuff, and the live bird, and dip them in the blood of the slaughtered bird and the fresh water, and sprinkle on the house 7 times. Is that what you're talking about? Because if that's how you make chicken soup, I'm not coming to your house for dinner.
Yeah. It was a little bit of a stretch, but maybe some things got lost in translation. Yeah.
Well, I do like the idea of like there's illness in the house, they can't go out, so somebody has to bring them chicken soup to get better. It cures everything. So I don't think that's what's going on. They dip it in the blood of the other bird, so that's, you're not supposed to eat blood. So
what if when they say blood, sometimes they're saying like the bludgeoned bird, like as in you've decapitated the bird and he's in preparation to be eaten, like that's what kind of.
But that only works in the English, that blood and bludgeoned sound alike. In the Hebrew, there's no question that they're saying blood.
Yeah, but still, like maybe they don't mean like maybe they mean the blood lost bird, or the bird that lost the blood.
Oh, all right, I see what you're saying. Blood as a euphemism for death.
Yeah.
Okay. Sure.
Joel?
Yeah, here's some historical information. I rechecked my sources yesterday. The NIH studies, National Institute of Health, There was no leprosy in the Middle East anywhere near that time. So here's historic note. Do people know what the Septuagint is? Septuagint?
Yes, you've brought it up before. It's the Greek.
What happened around the year 275 BCE, there were no people of the Jewish faith, hardly any, who understood a word of Hebrew. So Ptolemy said, we're going to collect 72 people. You guys go in rooms. I want a translation of the Torah into Greek. And they did. So fast forward to this particular chapter, and where we say Tzara'at, they had no word for it, and they translated it into the word lepra. So just to check that, of course, I pulled out the Septuagint in Greek. And I don't speak Greek, but I can sure recognize the letters. And it's lambda, eta, pi, rho, alpha. Said lepta. Okay, so forget about where that comes from. Now, here, let me just give a quick synopsis. I was thinking about this, and people are really freaked out about this all throughout Judaism. The entire section of Leviticus is called Torah HaKohanim, the law of the priests. Torah is like our Torah. Kohanim is priests. This is not for us to have to learn by heart, but let's say your grandfather is a priest, your father's a priest. Guess what? They're going to want you too to become a priest. Now, you just don't sign up for it. There's a lot of study. Here's my analogy. Your grandfather is a medical doctor. Your father is a famous transplant surgeon. Guess what? You're going to medical school. On your way, you're going to study biochemistry. You're going to study gross anatomy. There's a lot of fine details that medical doctors will tell you, oh, I don't even know why I studied that. But if you don't learn to study that and you do not become fairly clever, you will not become an MD. You will not become my MD, that's for sure. Okay? You went to med school down in the Caribbean? No, that's not for me either. You better be a nice top student. Not that you have to know biochemical pathways, but I bet you're going to be a pretty clever guy. So that is this. Now here is my evidence for that. If I turn to the Talmud has a very bad name in our Jewish tradition, and it really shouldn't. When I go to the Talmud, forget this little opener. If I go to Negaim, Mishnah Negaim, oh my God, it's around 600 pages. And the details are so incredible. And I'm sure that these young guys would have to study that. They'd be tested on it. They'd have to practice it. And that was some of their requirements. Similarly, Rabbi Goldstein has a lot of knowledge that blows me away. You have come out with things. And I said, oh my God, where does she know that from? I wish I had that background. I wish I went to a Hebrew camp, wherever you learned it. I'm in awe.
You know the story about the guy who wanted to be a Kohen?
No.
He went to his rabbi and said, Rabbi, I want to be a Kohen. Make me a Kohen. And the rabbi said, that's not how that works. I can't make you a Kohen. The guy says, all right, I see how this works. Maybe this will change your mind. And he writes a check for whatever, however much, and hands it over to the rabbi. And the rabbi's like, no, really, like I can't make you a Kohen. And the guy's like, all right, I see you're driving a hard bargain. Well, I know that that we need a new Torah, so maybe this will change your mind. And he writes a much bigger check and hands it over to the rabbi. And the rabbi's like, okay, why do you even want to be a Kohen so bad? And the guy's like, well, you know, my father was a Kohen, my grandfather was a Kohen. Yeah.
So there's a similar midrash where the guy goes to his Orthodox shul and says, Rabbi, my family dog, he's been with me so long, he's 13 years old. I want him to have a bar mitzvah. And the rabbi says, no, we can't do that. Look, I'm going to give you a nice big check. And the rabbi says, no, 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 no. And then the guy says, well, you know, I've already been down to the Reform shul right across the street, and they're willing to accept $10,000. So the Orthodox rabbi says to him, you didn't tell me your dog was Jewish.
There you go.
I'm sure that's literally true. I know it. I know it is. Not the bar mitzvah, but a lot of stuff.
Yeah. Yep. You'd be surprised how little denominational loyalty people have. Just fine. All right. Back to Torah. So yeah, so thank you, Joel, for that background on why Sara'at gets mistranslated as leprosy. Do you know then when did leprosy become a thing in the Middle East? Because we do see it later, like in the rabbinic writings, in stories about Jesus. Like they do appear that I think are understood to actually be leprosy.
First century.
First century CE.
CE. Yep.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Other questions or specific lines that jump out at you? I read a midrash once about why a guilt offering has to be brought after childbirth. Because it makes sense that some kind of offering would be brought, the burnt offering, the whatever, but maybe not a guilt offering, sorry, the sin offering. Like what is her sin? She's done this wonderful mitzvah and this miracle of life, right? So there's a midrash that says it's because during labor women cry out such lies as they will never lie with their husband again, they're never going to go through this again, they're going to divorce their husbands, all these things. So those lies are the sins that she has to make expiation for, and the curses on her husband's head she has to undo with the sin offering. Does that sound right to you, Chava?
Yeah, that sounds, yeah. I already knew that one. I knew exactly what they were talking about. No questions on that one. The same goes for, a young woman after her period.
Yeah. The cursing.
Right.
Yeah.
Towards the end, I think it was talking about like incontinence.
Incontinence. Interesting. I don't remember that part.
Like where if I really should use the words that are written.
It talks about
the discharge from men.
It doesn't, it's unclear what some of this discharge is. Some of it's clearly
right.
semen. Some of it could be urine, I suppose. I think also in the Talmud, there's a lot of discussion. You would be surprised how much discussion goes into like an unknown discharge. There's this category of person, it could be male or female, called a zav, which just means like something is leaking out of you that shouldn't be, and you're not really sure what it is. And so until you get that sorted, you are ritually impure. And so like in Shabbat, there's like, I don't know, discussions of like, or maybe it was Eruvin. Like, can this person be inside your Eruv? Can they touch your like Shabbat? Can they like partake in your communal Shabbat meal inside the Eruv? Can they do this? Can they do that? Because when someone is ritually unclean, like anything they touch could also be considered ritually unclean. Impure, I should say. Unclean sounds too judgmental. It's not actually about, that can get confusing in this parsha, especially because we're also talking about potentially contagious skin diseases. The Zav is not necessarily that, but it's just like his ritual impurity can be contagious in a like metaphysical way. And so, yeah, there's a lot of discussion about what he can and can't do, and depends on the type of discharge, and it, I don't know, there's all kinds of conversation about that.
I suppose men like to talk about things metaphorically like that. I think that would appeal to a lot of men.
Abnormal seminal discharge. Yeah. Right. So it being abnormal, sometimes it seems in the Talmud that it's not like, right, it's abnormal. Like they don't know exactly, it's not the right color, or like it's not the right time of month, and like, so it's not, I don't know, there's all kinds of things where it's like, we don't know what this discharge is. It's not normal. So yeah, Dave.
Was there any discussion among the rabbis as to essentially could a lot of these sa'arat be considered sexually transmitted diseases, results thereof, since it wasn't leprosy?
I don't know of any such commentary, but that's an interesting position. Can you say more about where you think that?
I was trying to think of, why all the offerings, sin offerings, when you had a rash or whatever, and if it's not leprosy, the implication to me is that it's some kind of moral failing of some kind or another, which would seem to me, given what men and women tend to do, and men and women and women, it's going to be sexual in at least in large part. And I just wondered if this was had been a topic of rabbinic discussion, or it was just left as tza'arat.
Yeah, I think that's that's as reasonable understanding of it as I said. I think the reason typically that it gets ascribed to this moral failing is that it's tied to Miriam's gossip. And so then the assumption is that everyone with Sara'at has engaged in gossip. But sexual impurity also seems like a reasonable guess. And then it's not as much like the divine punishment of an act of questionable morality, but like a direct consequence of it, right? So that I like that interpretation. I don't think I've heard that before, but I think it works.
The other thing that got me started on it was I still can't shake chapter 10 and the deaths of Nadab and Abihu.
Yeah.
And I've just been thinking about it, and the strange fire. And I've read some other commentaries, some that said, oh, it was really what got them was they were zapped for being arrogant and attempting to supplant Moses and Aaron. They wanted the old guys out of the way so they could take over. And so this was their means of saying, well, we can, anybody can do fire, watch us. And so they did whatever they did, either unsolicited or without consulting their elders, or in a manner that maybe, related to idolatry. But in some way, they transgressed. And so I'm looking at the Tzav, which is silly because Zav and Zur are not the same root, even though they begin with the same sign. But it just kind of stuck in my mind that maybe what we're dealing with here is a spiritual transgression. Yeah, particularly when you allied it with gossip, which I didn't see that. And I'd forgotten about Miriam because that doesn't come until later.
Right, that's in
They tend
Numbers.
to be too linear, I tend to go straight forward instead of jumping ahead. But that's that also gives me, something going. But I was thinking, if these guys really didn't buy what they were told by Moses and Aaron, thought these old guys, these geezers, I don't have to listen to them, which may also mean they were sexually impure, they committed adultery, it may mean they didn't wash properly,
Right.
it may mean they were drunk when they went in, any of a whole variety of things, essentially saying, enough is enough. We're going to do the sacrifice, but we'll do it our way. And maybe it was the sin of arrogance, something similar that made them spiritually unfit, which is why they got zapped. But I'm still struggling with that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's a difficult parsha, for sure. And we did talk about the traditional understandings of like, oh, well, they were drunk, they were arrogant, they were unwashed. I think, adding that possibility that if they were willing to break all of those rules, like who's to say they weren't also breaking, the rules of marital purity and sexual purity and whatever. And then that kind of adds another layer to them being unwashed, right? Like it's not just that they didn't do the ritual, hand washing and purifying for the sake of going into but they also like still have whatever on them.
Yeah, sure. They came fresh from an adulterous bed,
right?
Sanctuary without being ritually clean. At any rate, I've just, I guess I was going the juxtaposition, boom, 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 and I just wonder, is this all of a piece, or is it like, okay, this parsha is for this, and it's really not connected closely to this? It's just, all right, these are the rules. Was it you who said, or Joel who said, this is the law for the priests, and here's your handbook, guys.
Right. Yeah. And as Joel has definitely mentioned many times before, there's no before and after in Torah. So I think it can go both ways. And that's part of the work of Torah study and of Midrash and all of that is to play with the timeline a little bit and to decide, like, are these all connected? Are these their own sections, and in which direction, right? Like, connecting this parsha to a parsha in Numbers that's not going to appear for, 2 more months or so, with Miriam is not any more crazy than connecting it to last week's parsha. So it's totally up to your interpretation, and it's worth discussing as the group, because that's how we all learn. Yes, Joel.
So yes, David, thank you for bringing that up again. You also mentioned that word last week, which is the root of the word zara, meaning strange to our way of thinking. And I was thinking about that during the past week, and I've been exploring Zoroastrianism.
Ah,
Of course, Zoroaster is also known as Zarathustra. So this, of course, is the religion of Persia, ancient Persia, which was one of our enemies back in the day. And what was interesting to me was 1,000 years before all this occurred, the Persian people were very interested in fire, and they had a very unusual way. They had what they actually call the eternal lamp. Can't believe it, but they call it that. And each household would have to go, they'd send the child over, and the child would go over with his little thing and take fire from that eternal lamp. Like, they didn't have matches and Bic lighters. So, but that was a huge, huge part of their religion. And I started to think, based on what you explained to me last week, I'm wondering if Nadab and Abihu, maybe somehow they were paying homage to a Persian rite, which we want to stamp out. We want to stamp out so many things from the ancient world. Why? Because our way, I'm in 2021. Everything I read about cosmology is so supportive of Torah. It's like, it all comes to fruition, how the whole universe was created. So anyway, thank you, David, on that. Zoroastrianism.
The story of Nadav and Abihu, or at least its proposed timing of when and where, it actually took place, is not consistent. Like, it predates Judaism's encounter with Zoroastrianism, but we do know for sure that a lot of ancient cultures and religions borrowed from each other, and there's a lot of Zoroastrian influence, like in the Talmud, and because then they were living among, in Babylonia, they were living among active practitioners, and so I think that's definitely, I don't know if I could say it's a Peshat, but it's definitely a very clear interpretation traditionally, that they were doing some kind of idol worship. They were paying homage to some other rite that was not what God wanted, what our God wanted. So yeah. And fire, certainly, I mean, it's so primordial, right? Like, it's so it's so cornerstone to human life, that it definitely features prominently in a lot of ancient myths and cultures and rituals, and all that. There are some historians who think that perhaps Hanukkah is borrowed from Zoroastrian fire festivals, since the Book of Maccabees doesn't actually mention the miracle of the lamp, and that seems to be a later introduction into our ritual. That's one of the possible explanations for where it came from, was there was a fire festival on the winter solstice in Zoroastrianism that the rabbis maybe gleaned that from, and it was useful to promote the miracle of the oil over the military might of the Maccabees at a time when we were again under foreign rule, and it might be risky to promote revolution against our foreign rulers. So yeah. And we're coming up again on a fire festival in Judaism, right? Next week, 2 weeks, is Lag BaOmer. Is the 33rd day of the Omer, on which date tradition tells us 100 of Akiba's students were struck with the plague, and they overcame it. And then there's a bonfire. I don't know, it's all very mystical. But we celebrate with fire and outdoor games and fun things. It's the one day in the Omer where you're allowed to have fun and get a haircut.
Didn't know that.
Yeah.
I should have waited, but every time I took my mask off for going outside, my hearing aids would pop out. And so I finally thought, I do need to get my hair cut. So now I can put on a mask and remove it without fear.
Yep. I'm waiting. Philip doesn't want to go until he's fully vaccinated, and I've promised him I won't do anything he's not allowed to do until, we'll go together to get our haircuts in a month. But yeah. So the Omer will be over by then anyway, but it is tradition to not cut your hair for those 49 days, other than on Lag BaOmer. It's also tradition not to get married during those 49 days, except on Lag BaOmer. There's a whole bunch of stuff. It's not just fire. I don't know. All of it's very tied to ancient mysticism that doesn't, to my view, have a whole lot of Peshat root in Torah, but it is, whatever. Everybody's got their takes.
I was thinking that it has something to do with the fact that winter's now over, and you might have your first fruits, even though I think that's another holiday. You've got something to share at a festival, right? About the time that they have this, what do we call it? Omer.
Right. Well, that's part of why we count the Omer, is that that things are starting to grow, and you're counting the sheaths, right? The wheat growing. That's what Omer means, is like a sheaf of wheat. Sheaves is plural. Does it turn to a V? Okay. Yeah, so you're counting that, and then on Shavuot, that's when you're celebrating the harvest. So the 33rd day is I don't know, to me it's just kind of well, you're more than halfway through at that point. Why do you need a break on the 33rd day? You're almost there. But it's because of the great miracle of Rabbi Akiva's yeshiva, which certainly this year, that we're starting to see an end to our own plague, I feel resonates. So this year is a lot of firsts for Ner Shalom. That we're gonna do Yom HaAtzmaut stuff with the kids on Sunday. We're gonna do Pesach Sheni because we can gather together outside. We're gonna do Lag BaOmer. It's just exciting to be moving toward being able to gather together. And so these great opportunities open themselves up to outdoor Jewish, authentic celebrations that we don't normally make a big deal of as Reformed Jews, but this year it feels very relevant. Anyway, back to Torah. Anything else? Something that I always struggle with in this parsha is that the time of impurity is twice as long for bearing a girl child than a male child. And the traditional explanation, the rabbinic commentary on that is that, like, because it has to take into account the female child's eventual, you know, nida period, even though that's 13 years away, but because she will herself have more periods of impurity than a male child, bearing her also necessitates a longer period of impurity for the mother. And I don't get it. I don't understand that logic.
I feel that it's very certain because boys tend to be larger babies because of their genetic makeup. I think even then there's some like testosterone that allows them to grow a little bit bigger. And there are stats that indicate boy babies are, at least a few ounces, sometimes half a pound or so larger than the average girl. So that would mean that the delivery is more stressful.
Right, but so
boy.
when you
Yeah,
want
so then,
longer
right,
rest, it should be the other way around.
Yeah. I don't get it.
It was written by men.
Yeah.
We're guilty.
But oh well. At least
Joel wants to say something.
oh, sorry. Joel, go ahead.
I just want to mention that the biologic condition supports this. All males have one X and one Y. All females have two X's. By the way, with minor exceptions in both cases. So with twice as many X's, this pays homage to the fact that if I go back 7 generations personally, I have exactly one great, 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 great grandfather who has donated that Y chromosome to me, which has come down to me virtually intact with almost no crossover. The Y chromosome is very tiny. The two X chromosomes, there's a great deal of crossover, number one. Number two, if I go back 7 generations, for the X chromosome, the inheritance pattern follows the Fibonacci sequence, which is around 65,000 potential donors of that X chromosome. There's a great difference there. There's something very mystical about that. And,
But what does that have to do with needing a longer time of blood impurity?
well, I think that there's it's like the rest of our lives. There's a certain period of contemplation that's needed, a certain period, how we have to see our place in the universe and how precarious our lives are. I mean, every one of us has won the lottery thousands of times over. Just the fact that we're here, just the fact that we exist. And I think that extra long period, I think, isn't that what we do all the time? Like, for example, if we're going to pray, a lot of people of the Jewish faith do a lot of very serious prayer compared to, I don't know, Mormon or someone else. Or let's take Scientology, because I know we don't want to beat down other religions. Take Scientology. Oh my God, Xenu came from another planet and 75 million people were forced to stand on the volcanoes and they set off nuclear bombs and they all died. Okay, I can dismiss all of that in around 4 seconds.
Right.
Stuff. Oh my God, I can't. I have to consider, I have to think, I have to put myself in the right frame of mind.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I just don't agree that that bears any relation to needing a longer time of impurity after bearing a girl child. Like, is your position then that the place in the universe of a girl child is more precarious, so her mother needs to be in that period of contemplation for twice as long than a male.
The origins are more obscure than, I'm not talking about the female, I'm talking about the chromosome specifically and the Y chromosome specifically. In other words,
But you said it bears out on this verse. So I'm asking, how does that connect? Because I'm not getting that piece.
if the mother has a child and that child has two X chromosomes, that spreads out in a unique way. If that,
He's saying women are more complicated.
well, if the woman has
Okay.
a male child, well, it can spread out because that male child can have a female daughter or can have a male son. If there is the male son, there's a different relationship to the X chromosome than there is if she has the female child where there's two X chromosomes. It's like, it's a different nexus point. And the mathematics bears it out. And unfortunately, whenever I tried to express it to people and send them charts and stuff, oh my God, they must think I'm from Pluto or something, because it's not understandable. Not to me either. But I think there must be some connection. As there, by the way, as there is with everything in Torah, I can't find one verse that's not connected in a very profound way to all of our existence. Not even one verse, the way it's put together. We just don't understand it. And by the way, I don't think we're going to understand it. It's written right in Torah. Hanis tarot ladanoy Eloheinu v'haniglot lonu ulavanenu ad olam ha'soda kol divrei haTorah hazot, which is Deuteronomy chapter 29, verse 28. The secret matters of the Lord our God, of our Creator, shall remain secret. However, the Torah is for us to hagid, to tell to our children, to lanu ulavanenu, to ourselves and to our children, and for the rest of the time. It's right in Torah. Again, it's not clear.
Right. So that's really the answer, is that we don't know. We
Yeah.
don't know why.
The human brains.
Right. Well, sometimes part of understanding more deeply the esoterics of Torah is to be honest about, when it is unclear, when it seems illogical, when it feels at odds with our current understandings of equality and such. So, yeah. Somebody is cooking something delicious and the smell is wafting into the courtyard. And it's making me hungry. So yeah, any last questions or comments? Sections we didn't talk about? We're arcing toward our close, so. No? All right. Well, I'll share with you one last drash that I read. A friend of mine, we were global justice fellows together with the American Jewish World Service. We traveled to Nicaragua and El Salvador together, and she wrote this week's Devar Torah for Trua, the rabbinic call for human rights. And she had a really excellent drash about the connection between, as I said, if we take it at its pashat and don't understand the moral failings that might lead to tzara'at, it's sort of troubling that even once they are clean, once they've done their quarantine, it's hard to reintegrate. And there's a lot of like really public rituals that can be, that might feel shameful for the person. And so she likened that to her time as a chaplain for a prison reentry program and how difficult it can be to re-enter society, even once you've done your time, that, you know, places won't hire you if you have a record, or, you know, you could get caught up just being in the wrong place at the wrong time. It's hard to get out of those wrong places if you can't get a job and move into better society. And so it all gets kind of circular and difficult to re-enter. And that, you know, maybe part of what we need to understand from Torah sometimes is it's not the straightforward that this is what we should be doing, but more like what is the complication in this, and how can we make reintegration more smooth for people who, you know, who have been cured. Their tzaraat is gone. They've done their time. They're ready to be contributing members of society, and you know, they can't do that if they wear a mark of shame beyond that, their quarantine. So I thought that was a really beautiful drash. So I wanted to share that with you all.
Yes. Thank you.
And so we'll close there, and I'll see you all next week.
All right. Thank you very much. Joel?
Thank you.
Bye.